Welcome, curious minds. You've given us a monumental task today, a really big one. We're going to deep dive into nothing less than the outline of history, a panoramic view of life and humanity as it was understood when our sources were compiled.
It's quite the scope, isn't it?
It really is. This isn't just, a list of dates and names. It's a serious attempt to tell the whole story, truly and clearly, the story of life, of mankind, from the heavens themselves, right down to our messy, fascinating world.
It is a profound undertaking. The author's conviction, echoing Friedrich Ratzel, is pretty clear. All existence is a single conception sustained from beginning to end upon one identical law.
So our mission here is to unpack this huge narrative, pull out the most important bits of knowledge and insight, and explore some surprising connections, how everything links up from the earliest organisms right up to the biggest conflicts in human history. It's really meant as a shortcut, a way to get well-informed about the grand sweep of our shared past. Okay, let's unpack this incredible journey then. Our source material takes us from the formation of stars all the way to the immediate aftermath of the Great War. And it even tries to look into the future of humanity.
Yeah, it's ambitious.
It is, and it's written plainly for the general reader, and we're definitely going to keep that spirit alive for you today. So as we get ready to trace this immense story, what's one of the first things that jumps out at you? What feels particularly striking right at the start?
Well, for me, it's the sheer scale, right from the get-go. Our sources bravely start at the absolute beginning. They set the stage for life on Earth by first putting our little planet in context, within the vastness of the universe. It's a foundational approach, grounding the whole story before we even get down to, the microscopic details.
So our journey literally starts out there, among the stars. When we look up, mostly we just see stars as, points of light. But with powerful telescopes, some of these tiny points resolve into these breathtaking whirls and clouds of shining vapor, the nebulae.
Yeah.
And they are so incredibly far away that even movement spanning millions of miles would be totally imperceptible to us here on Earth. It really puts our place in the cosmos into perspective, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And within that almost unimaginable vastness, there's one star our sources highlight, a great ball of flame, and beyond comparison nearer to us.
Our sun.
Exactly, our sun. While its fundamental nature is just like any other fixed star, its unique proximity is what makes it so vital, why it appears so different to us. It's the fixed star that our whole story, our existence revolves around. It forces you to grasp the immense scale of the universe first.
It's quite humbling, really. And when we zoom into the beginnings of life on this, tiny speck of a planet, our sources suggest the very earliest forms were small and soft, leaving absolutely no trace in the geological record. It's almost like the universe started sketching, not painting, the first life forms. Feels like a cosmic mystery.
Precisely. The geological record only starts telling a story once these early living things develop hard materials, things like skeletons and shells made of lime. These durable structures could leave fossil vestiges after they died, finally putting them on record for us to examine. So geology, in large part, is an account of these fossils and the order in which the layers of rocks lie on top of each other. For example, we can trace the lower Paleozoic rocks going back maybe over 500 million years. That's when ancient marine arthropods, like the sea scorpion and the trilobite, ruled the seas.
Trilobites.
Yeah. And above those, geologists distinguish the upper Paleozoic and then the Mesozoic, or middle life, rocks. This Mesozoic era alone, perhaps 100 million years long, swift years in geological terms, contains this wonderful array of fossil remains, bones, including the dinosaurs, of course.
Of course.
So this vast system of fossil-bearing rocks lets us piece together this incredible story, even if the record isn't always, perfectly neat or orderly. It's just the traces left behind.
What's truly captivating here, though, is this underlying idea that every event, every life, leaves some kind of trace if we are intelligent enough to detect the meaning of that trace. It's like a cosmic detective story. The rocks aren't laid out like a book for us to read. They're a complex puzzle. It takes immense intelligence, patience to figure it out. And this whole concept, life constantly leaving clues, it leads us right into the idea of evolution, doesn't it? Hashtag, tag, 1.2, life's great leaps, evolution and adaptation.
Indeed. Our sources tell us that young living things are never exactly like their parents or each other. There's always a slight difference, a unique variation. The sources call this individuality. And this inherent difference means that in a world that's constantly changing, life must change too. Modification and differentiation have to occur. It leads to the gradual disappearance of old species and the appearance of new ones. Think of it like a subtle but absolutely relentless refining process.
So we're not just talking about, say, furry beasts in snow and ice adapting their coats. This principle goes way back. It extends to the soft, simple beginnings of life, those jellies and primordial creatures that flowed and crawled for hundreds of millions of years in the shallow, warm waters of the Proterozoic seas.
Exactly. The Proterozoic, that's a geological eon stretching from about 2.5 billion down to 541 million years ago. A time of very early, mostly single-celled life. It's clear life is just in this constant state of shifting, refining itself to meet whatever conditions the world throws at it.
Which leads to a huge question. How did life get out of the water? How did it conquer the land?
A critical question, and our sources detail the crucial adaptations needed for both plants and animals. For plants, a huge advantage was gained by developing protection for their spores from drying out. That was the key.
Right, protection from drought.
Yes. This innovation allowed reproduction to happen without submergence in water. As soon as a plant species could manage that, it could live, reproduce, spread above the high water mark, bathed in sunlight out of reach of the waves. The main classifications of larger plants actually mark stages in this progressive release from needing constant water thanks to developing supportive, woody structures.
And animals made a similar, equally dramatic leap, right? From the water to breathing air on solid ground. That's massive.
Exactly. In the case of early vertebrate land animals, the gills of their fish ancestors were first supplemented and then eventually replaced by a kind of bag-like growth from the throat.
A primitive lung.
A primitive lung or swimming bladder, yes. Our sources give a fantastic living example, the African lungfish, which still survives today.
Wow.
These mudfish live in tropical areas with really distinct rainy and dry seasons. During the dry season, when rivers shrink to just ditches, they survive by burying themselves in the mud and using those primitive lungs to breathe air. It shows very clearly how early vertebrates could work their way out of the water. This vital step eventually led to the earliest known point of human ancestry on land, the amphibia. And as we look higher in the late Paleozoic record, that's roughly 359 or 252 million years ago, we find this air adaptation process going even further, leading to the appearance of true reptiles, emerging amidst this abundance of diverse amphibia.
And what a vibrant early land environment it must have been. You're talking vast green swamps, a great variety of flying cockroaches, scorpions, and early spiders, though. Interestingly, our sources note they hadn't developed spinnerets for web making yet. Land snails appeared too.
Quite a scene.
But then came what the sources call the most striking revolution in Earth's history before mankind. The apparently abrupt end of the age of reptiles and the onset of a new austere climate. This dramatic shift ushered in a completely new kind of life, the mammals. That really was a huge turning point, wasn't it?
It absolutely was. This era saw the decline of those great reptiles. For instance, the sources mention pterodactyls, ancient flying reptiles. Some had a wingspan up to 29 inches. Their wings were structured like a hand with one really long finger and a web. Importantly, no feathers.
No feathers, okay.
Which contrasts sharply with the truly bird-like creatures that emerged later. Their wings were more like an arm covered in feathers. These creatures hopped, clambered, skimmed, and flew. But the pivotal shift was towards mammals. Our sources highlight two key distinctions separating mammals from other reptiles. First, a peculiar care for their eggs. Birds incubate. Mammals retain the egg within the mother. And second, a disposition to look after their young for a period after birth.
Unlike reptiles.
Exactly. Reptiles, by comparison, typically show the greatest carelessness about their offspring, and hair, we're told, was evidently the earliest distinguishing feature of mammals.
So this age of inferiority and hardship for early mammals, when they were living in the shadow of the dominant reptiles, it seems like, ironically, that set in motion a new continuity of perception, a refining of their senses, their intelligence, leading eventually to man.
It's a fascinating idea, isn't it? Adversity forging intelligence.
It really is. And our sources point out that a number of mammal types were already appearing way back in the Eocene epoch. That's around 56 to 33.9 million years ago. And they were differentiating in various directions. Some perfected themselves as herbivorous quadrupeds. Some became leapers and climbers in the trees. Some even turned back to the water to swim. But crucially, the sources say all these types were unconsciously exploiting and developing the brain through their adaptations.
And the environment played a monumental role in these shifts, particularly the glacial ages. Our sources refer to a time diagram of the glacial ages, using estimates from researchers like Albrecht Penck and C.A. Reeds as important guides.
So what caused these ice ages?
Well, what we see are three distinct kind of wavering systems of astronomical change. all happening independently. These include the precession of the equinoxes, that slow wobble of Earth's axis like a spinning top, and the change in the obliquity of Earth's tilt, the angle relative to its orbit.
Okay, orbital mechanics.
Right. These orbital distortions significantly impact our climate. For instance, when Earth's orbit is most eccentric, less circular, more elongated, there's a season when Earth is nearest the sun, perihelion, getting lots of heat, and a season when it's farthest, aphelion, getting very little warmth. These cycles led to long periods of expansion and multiplication when life flourished and diversified, contrasted with harsh ages of weeding out, where many species, genera, even entire classes disappeared. The survivors learned some stern lessons during those times.
So it's not just about what life did, but what the Earth did to life. The planet itself was a huge driving force in evolution.
Excellent.
And our sources suggest that our world today seems to be emerging with fluctuations from a prolonged phase of adversity and extreme conditions. The thought that maybe in 500,000 years, we might live in a winterless world with trees and vegetation even in the polar circles, that's a wild thought.
It is. It suggests a future where our descendants might inhabit a vastly different, perhaps far more hospitable world. A fascinating prospect. ############################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################### grand geological and biological shifts, our sources then zoom in on our own kind, tracing the lineage of humanity. And the narrative immediately tackles and dismisses some fanciful ideas about human descent from different ape species.
Like what sort of ideas?
Well, for instance, the notion that maybe the Negro descended from a gorilla-like ancestor or the Chinese from something like a chimpanzee. Instead, the prevailing idea among those best qualified to form an opinion at the time was that man descended from a walking ape, not an arboreal one, not one that lived primarily in trees.
Ah, okay. A ground dweller. That's a crucial distinction for understanding our evolutionary path, isn't it?
It really is.
And the sources identify some fascinating early candidates for our lineage. We learned about Dryopithecus from the Miocene age. That's roughly 23 to 5.3 million years ago. It apparently had a very human-looking jaw.
Hmm.
Then there are Sevopithecus and Paleopithecus from the Siwalik Hills in northern India, both potentially closely related to the human ancestor. And our sources even suggest these animals might have already been using implements. That's a tantalizing glimpse into a time when our ancestors maybe started using tools.
It is, and this brings us to a really crucial discovery. Pithecanthropus erectus, often called the walking ape man, found in Java. This creature had a brain about halfway in size between a chimpanzee's and a modern human's.
Okay.
But what's particularly significant is that its thigh bone was adapted for standing and running, just like a human's.
Meaning its hands were free.
Exactly. Unlike an arboreal ape, its hands were free to be used. Now, the sources can't definitively say Pithecanthropus erectus is a direct human ancestor, but they guess that the creatures who scattered those very early stone tools, the eoliths, over the world must have been closely similar and related.
And then we have Homo heidelbergensis.
Mm.
Its jaw apparently was human in terms of teeth, but might have been too narrow to allow for articulate speech. Suggests a different form of communication, perhaps.
Possibly.
And this creature lived in a world just teeming with megafauna. Elephants, horses, rhinoceroses, bison, all sharing its environment.
Our sources provide a speculative but probably broadly accurate map of Europe and Western Asia from around 50,000 years ago, during the Neanderthal age.
Right, the Neanderthals.
Indeed. The daily life of the first men in this period involved sharing caves with creatures like cave lions, cave bears, cave hyenas, all of which needed to be driven out and kept out.
Sounds challenging.
Definitely. But what's important to understand, and often gets misunderstood, is that Neanderthal men were a distinct species. Their neck bones, jaws, teeth, they show they had no Neanderthal affinities with our modern species. They were not our direct ancestors.
Okay, so a separate branch.
It seems so. Instead, true men of our own species were developing elsewhere in the world along parallel lines, reaching a higher level of power and achievement. And when the fourth glacial age started to soften towards more temperate conditions, this new human type came onto the scene. It looks like they eventually exterminated Homo neanderthalensis.
Wow. Replace them entirely.
That's the suggestion. These true men likely developed in South Asia or North Africa, or maybe in lands now submerged beneath the Mediterranean basin. As more remains are found, we'll learn more about their origins.
This concept of true men emerging elsewhere, parallel to the Neanderthals and eventually replacing them, that's truly captivating. It suggests a much more complex human story than just a simple straight line.
It does.
What do our sources say about their early artistic expressions? It clearly wasn't just about survival by then, was it?
Not at all. The earliest drawings are described as possibly just idle scratchings, maybe like kids' drawings today. Perhaps it began when a savage scratched with a flint on a smooth rock and was reminded of a line or a gesture.
Huh.
Initially, these drawings lacked the capacity to group animals effectively, but the sources note a progression over centuries to astonishingly vivid and like representations of beasts as more skillful artists emerged. Their solid carvings seem to be at least as old as their first pictures. This reveals a growing aesthetic sense, a desire for expression beyond just, basic utility.
And this artistic progression eventually led or coincided with a massive shift away from the pure hunting life. Around 12,000 years ago, with forests spreading and a big change in fauna like reindeer vanishing from many European areas, the long dominance of hunting in Europe came to an end.
Right, the environment changed dramatically.
And the sources mention changing conditions often bring new diseases, so maybe there were prehistoric pestilences too.
It's possible.
This profound transformation marked the beginning of the Neolithic Age, a fundamental change in how humanity lived and thrived, really setting the stage for civilization as we know it.
So we make this transition from nomadic hunters to something completely different, the age of cultivation. This period starts around 12,000 years ago, and it is indeed a monumental shift for humanity, likely spurred by the spread of forests and maybe the emergence of new diseases, as you mentioned. These environmental pressures probably forced humanity to adapt, find new, more sustainable ways to feed itself through deliberate food production.
And the everyday Neolithic life, as described in our sources, sounds remarkably simple by our standards today, yet it was utterly revolutionary for its time. People likely squatted on clay floors. There's no evidence of stools or tables yet.
Basic living.
Very basic. And the sources give us these fascinating domestic details. No cats, mice, or rats had yet adapted to human homes, and the familiar cluck of the hen wasn't yet part of human life, nor the domestic egg part of the diet.
Hard to imagine now.
Isn't it? Their chief tools were also quite basic, primarily the axe for clearing land and the bow, maybe for defense or any remaining hunting.
And our sources suggest a really profound connection between this new practice of cultivation and early human belief systems. What's particularly striking is the theory presented that burying a person and then later seeing vigorous crop growth on that exact spot led to this immediate traceable association
Between death and fertility.
between death, burial, and the hundredfold increase in grain. Yes. The primitive logic, as the source puts it, was that the buried person had given them back the grain they gave him increased a hundredfold. This offers a fascinating glimpse into early human thought, where direct observation of nature directly influenced spiritual beliefs and rituals around planting and sowing.
Wow. And here's a truly dramatic geographical revelation from our sources. The flooding of the Mediterranean Valley.
Ah, yes, the Lost Valley idea.
The idea that the Mediterranean was once a couple of landlocked sea basins, maybe not connected, or perhaps only by a massive overflow river. The eastern basin was apparently even fresher water, fed by huge rivers like the Nile, something called the Adriatic River, the Red Sea River, and maybe a large river from a much bigger sea of Central Asia.
Incredible picture.
And the sources state there are strong reasons for believing humans, possibly Neolithic men, wandered over that now lost Mediterranean valley. Imagine early humans exploring lush valleys and riverbanks that are now deep under the sea. That's a dramatic change in geography and a lost world indeed.
This period also saw significant migrations that reshaped populations across Europe. The Iberian or Mediterranean people, described as dark white, were apparently ousted across France and Great Britain by a round barrow-making Alpine or Alpine Nordic race.
Round barrows, okay, burial mounds.
Yes, this Alpine Nordic race pushed the Iberians westward and southward everywhere as they expanded. Our sources also discuss various ancient language groups, Aryan, Cretan, Lydian, Sumerian, Elamite, and this Basque Caucasian Dravidian group, suggesting deep historical connections. There's even speculation that ancient Sumerian might have been a kind of linking language between early Basque Caucasian and early Mongolian groups.
Fascinating.
And the existence of isolated language patches like Papuan, Native Australian, and the now extinct Tasmanian further supports the idea of the comparative speechlessness of Paleolithic man before these great linguistic shifts and migrations really began to shape human communication.
We also learn about the long barrow people, the Iberians, who were apparently Rather small human type, generally with an oval face and a long head.
Long barrows contrasting with the round barrows of the invaders.
Exactly. And there's the rather grim detail from our sources that they were cannibals.
Yes, that's inferred from traces of charred, broken, and cut human bones, including the bones of children found in their burial sites.
It certainly paints a vivid, if stark, picture of the sheer variety of human groups and practices back then, how vastly different life, and indeed death, must have been. Hashtag 2.2, the complex birth of religion and philosophy.
And beyond just the practicalities of survival, early humans were starting to wrestle with much bigger questions. Our sources detail the beginnings of primitive philosophy, exploring the origins of religion not as a single event, but as a tangle of ideas. Ideas about commanding beings and spirits, about gods, about all sorts of musts and
This is
must-nots.
not a neat package.
Not at all. Like everything else human, religion grew with and through human association, developing slowly as the brain and powers of comprehension gradually became capable of such general conceptions. Primitive man, let alone his ancestral apes, couldn't have had abstract ideas of God or religion. These complex concepts emerged as societies got more complex and capable of abstract thought.
And a central, almost primal figure in this emerging religious landscape seems to be what our sources call the old man in religion.
Ah, the old man.
This figure represents a deep-seated primal fear and a disposition to propitiate him even after death, driven by the uncertainty that he might only be asleep or, faking it.
That primal fear.
Exactly. And it's directly linked to the origin of some of the earliest taboos, like those separating brother and sister, or making a man hide from his stepmother. These taboos, found among many savage peoples globally, apparently ensured young males could escape the old man's potential wrath. It really highlights how deeply ingrained fear and social control were in shaping early rules and beliefs.
What's particularly fascinating here is the strong connection between practical life and evolving beliefs. With the coming of the primitive herdsman, for instance, there was a considerable broadening out of these practices and beliefs.
So,
Well, Neolithic man, now a herdsman, was nomadic in a different way than the primordial hunter. He was forced to develop a sense of direction and the lie of the land as he watched his flock, by night as well as day. This shift in lifestyle, demanding new observations and skills, brought new needs and interpretations into the realm of religious thought, further diversifying early spiritual practices.
and certain powerful images and narratives seem to appear again and again in human mythology. Our sources tell us Neolithic man was enormously impressed by serpents, and he no longer took the sun for granted, developing a deep reverence for it.
Sun and serpent, yes, recurring themes.
It's noted that nearly everywhere Neolithic culture spread, there went this disposition to associate the sun and the serpent in decoration and worship. This primitive serpent worship spread far beyond regions where snakes were actually, practically important. Suggests a deeper symbolic significance, maybe life, death, renewal.
It seems likely. So the sun, the serpent, the old man, these deep recurring symbols truly shaped early thought. It's clear that from these many diverse roots and fundamental human needs, from the desire for cleansing, the craving for power and knowledge, the temple as a new social fact began to crystallize. It became a central place for a community formed by complex necessities, dominated by this creation of human fears and hopes. Okay, so let's unpack how these early ideas about gods and temples actually transformed into structured power. We see the emergence of a distinct priesthood, a caste and a class apart, who quickly became, in many places, the most important part of the city population.
More important than rulers.
Initially, in some societies, yes. Their primary duty was the worship of and sacrifices to the god of the temple, performed at very particular times and seasons. The temple itself accumulated power and wealth through these complex necessities, becoming a dominant social fact driven by human fears and hopes. It really was the center of early community life.
That sounds like an incredibly powerful institution. How did this compare to other emerging civilizations? Did everyone follow that model?
Well, that's where a fascinating contrast emerges when we look at the Aryan peoples, according to our sources. Unlike, say, Mesopotamian civilization, they apparently never passed through a phase of temple rule on their way to civilization. Instead, they came to it later, adopting ideas of both temple and kingship already elaborately developed from the more civilized Hamitic or Semitic people they conquered.
Ah, interesting. So they borrowed the structure.
It seems so, which is a stark difference to Mesopotamia, where the importance of gods and priests was very apparent right from the start. But gradually, the power dynamic shifted there, leading to ongoing internal tensions.
So struggle for power then,
Right.
between priests and kings.
Precisely. The Mesopotamian narrative, our sources tell us, is one of a continuous struggle, king against priests. No monarch felt truly secure in Babylon without taking the hand of Bel, meaning they had to be ritually adopted by the priesthood of Bel as the god's son and representative.
Wow, quite a requirement.
It was. The sources state that the politics of that world, the revolutions, usurpations, changes of dynasty, largely turned upon issues between these great, wealthy priesthoods and the growing, but still maybe inadequate, power of the monarchy. For example, the Bible relates how the Ark of the Covenant was captured by the Philistines and taken to the temple of their god, Dagon.
Right, I remember that story.
And the story vividly describes how the statue of Dagon fell down and was broken, and the Philistines were struck with disease. In this biblical account, the priests fill the scene, there's no king even mentioned, emphasizing their central and formidable role in society, wielding divine power.
So it was a real battle for influence, wasn't it? Not just over land, but over the very legitimacy of rule itself.
Hmm.
And we see how Cyrus, bringing in what the sources call irreligious Aryans, meaning they had a more pragmatic approach, inadvertently undermined the ancient priesthood by not fully addressing the needs of a changing world in the traditional religious way. It was a pragmatic move for his immediate policy, but it ultimately weakened the traditional religious authority by introducing a different worldview.
That tension played out in Egypt too, but from a different angle, through the concept of the god kings.
Ah, the pharaohs.
Exactly. The divinity of pharaohs was absolute. Their supposed illegitimate births were displayed in extraordinary detail, as with Amenophis III. They even had the custom of marrying blood relations, including sisters, because they were considered too divine to marry commoners. This reinforced their unique status.
So Egyptian history is marked by this clear struggle between the palace and the temple. But the pharaoh's divine status gave them a unique position of power, constantly challenging priestly influence.
A different dynamic, but still that tension.
Definitely. And then there's the dramatic story of Shi Huangti, the first universal emperor of China, around 221 BC. He literally tried to destroy the entire Chinese literature, to rule without the burden of tradition. He made this strenuous attempt to seek out and destroy all the existing classics.
The famous burning of the books.
Exactly. These didn't really vanished while he ruled, and he welded China into a unity that endured for centuries. But crucially, when he had passed, the hidden books crept out again.
Incredible resilience.
It really is a powerful testament to the enduring power of knowledge and tradition, how resilient culture can be, even against the most determined attempts to suppress it. Our sources also mention the Chinese system endured for centuries despite invaders and dynasties, partly due to the imprisonment of the Chinese mind in a script and idiom of thought so elaborate and difficult.
So the complexity itself became a preservative force.
In a way, yes. So much mental energy was consumed just in acquiring it. This is why the development of a Chinese alphabet and modern educational reforms are seen as trying to release the Chinese mind from this ancient, very demanding entanglement.
Fascinating. This brings us to an important question. How did social classes solidify in these early civilizations? How did that happen?
Well, our sources show that by imperceptible degrees, the common man's patch of cultivated land stopped being his own. It increasingly belonged to the god or the king or some official, all of whom exacted a fraction of his produce as rent or tax.
Ah, the beginnings of taxation and rent?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
This led to a system of rent, taxation, and forced labor where common men had to leave their patches and work for their masters.
Yeah.
And as these old civilizations developed, mercenary armies replaced national levies, and servile gang labor became a more and more important factor.
Gang labor.
Yeah, spreading from mines and big building projects into cultivation. The sources contrast this with the later development of property rights in land and securities, which, at least in theory, brought greater stability and defined ownership more clearly.
We also encounter Herodotus here, one of the first writers of critical and intelligent history, described as a specimen of free intelligence. He stood out in a world often dominated by priestly or court chronicles, showing an early inclination towards independent inquiry.
A real historian.
In many ways, yes. The sources also discuss the idea of class war, noting its promotion by upper classes, but also describing it as a natural nemesis. The idea that the mass of the excluded would naturally range themselves in antagonism to their superiors.
And this is seen most starkly, perhaps, in the Indian caste system.
Definitely. With Brahmins as the reproductive and exclusive class, the custodians of tradition and knowledge, you have the four main traditional castes: Brahmins, priests, scholars; Kshatriyas, warriors, rulers; Vaishyas, merchants, farmers; and Shudras, laborer servants, though of course many complex subdivisions existed within them.
And what's particularly striking here is that Gautama Buddha taught directly against the caste system.
A radical stance.
Hugely radical for his time. He proclaimed, "As the four streams that flow into the Ganges lose their names as soon as they mingle their waters in the holy river, so all who believe in Buddha cease to be Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaisyas, and Sudras," aiming for a universal brotherhood that transcended these inherited social divisions. A remarkable idea back then. Hashtag 3.2, the Hebrew narrative, faith and nationhood. Okay, we also need to unpack the story of the Hebrews. Our sources point out the difficulty in tracing their settlement in Egypt. While there's an Egyptian record of Semitic peoples in Goshen under Ramses II, suggesting maybe they were drawn into Egypt by famine, there's a striking absence of any mention of Moses, the plagues, or a drowned pharaoh in Egyptian records.
That is a significant silence, isn't it? It highlights the complexities, the limitations of historical sources. It makes you consider multiple perspectives.
Absolutely. And the Hebrew struggle for the Promised Land against the Philistines was long, often unsuccessful. Our sources note the land was never completely in their grasp.
Right.
The biblical accounts in Joshua, Judges, Kings, they give us a growing flavor of reality. The early kings, like David, had a bloody end, according to the sources. And Solomon's reign began with similarly bloody actions. The murder of Shimei, Joab, even when Joab was claiming sanctuary at Jehovah's altar.
Not exactly a peaceful start.
No. But Solomon took a surprisingly modern approach to religion for his time. He continued an alliance with Hiram, king of Sidon, using his kingdom as a high road to reach and build shipping on the Red Sea, expanding his commercial reach.
Pragmatic.
Very. He also allowed for the development of new cults and temples on high places, which indicates a departure from a rigid, singular religious focus. It suggests a period of some religious fluidity.
So it sounds like a period of significant religious and political shifts for the Hebrews.
It certainly was. But then came Josiah's reign in the 7th century BC. That's when the reading of the law occurred, a pivotal moment often associated with finding a lost book of the law.
The Deuteronomic reforms.
Exactly. This was followed by a dramatic destruction of cults and high places dedicated to other gods, a decisive move towards centralizing and purifying their religion around the worship of a single god.
But what's particularly fascinating here, and a critical turning point according to our sources, is the idea that the Jewish mind made a great step forward during the captivity in Babylon, starting in 597 BC.
Captivity leading to progress. How?
Well, this was an age of historical inquiry and learning in Babylonia. A really stimulating intellectual atmosphere. Relieved of their bickering, murderous kings, restrained from internal politics, the Jewish mind could focus intensely on learning, codifying their traditions.
Okay, so this period of dispersion and captivity actually unified their minds and hopes, led to forming an exclusive people.
Yes, initially focused on doctrine, but later welcoming proselytes. This concept of exclusivity, while it presented challenges, was also a powerful force for cohesion, for identity when facing external pressures.
And this period led to a profound development. The Hebrew prophets.
A crucial emergence. Our sources describe them as the earliest and certainly the best evidence of the appearance of a new kind of leading in human affairs.
What made them different?
They weren't a new class or a priestly order. They were individuals who embodied this overflow of moral ideas into the general community. They drove a steady expansion of their ideas towards one God in all the world, moving beyond tribal deities to envision a universal moral authority, a God of all humanity.
Which leads to that profound statement from our sources, that the long-sought peace had come into the world through these moral ideas.
It represents a huge shift, doesn't it? From fear and taboos to this idea of a universal conscience, laying crucial groundwork for future universalist faiths. Hashtag 3.3, the Hellenic world, from city-states to Alexander's vision.
Okay, from the ancient East, let's shift west to the Hellenic peoples. A fascinating mix, apparently, of Celtic, Iberian, and Nordic influences, who assimilated earlier civilizations like the Hittites.
A real melting pot.
Seems like it. Our sources describe their beginnings as a forest people, quite wasteful of wood because it was so abundant, and also cattle people. They first lived in open villages outside the ruins of the cities they destroyed. But these ruins constantly suggested a model for them, influencing their eventual urban development.
And this early living eventually led to the origin of the Greek city-states. They adapted the heroic social system of the Iliad to these new conditions, forming small, fiercely independent city-states, each with its own identity.
Right, the polis.
Exactly. And these communities developed different political systems. Monarchy, like we see with Philip of Macedon, aristocracy, rule by a select few, and democracy, famously exemplified by Athens under Pericles.
Which brings up an important point. What did Greek democracy really mean back then? Our sources are clear. It was vastly different from our modern understanding.
Very different. Power was limited to a locally privileged class. Even in democratic Athens, there was often a big population of serfs, slaves, and outlanders, non-citizens, who had absolutely no voice in government.
So democracy was for the few, not the many.
Pretty much. The only real difference between an oligarchy, ruled by a few, and a democracy was simply the number of privileged citizens participating. And this limitation of power meant there was this intense separatism among Greek cities, made effective union almost impossible without outside conquest.
Always squabbling.
Constantly. The sources, drawing from Herodotus, vividly describe the feuds and chronic warfare that kept the Greek world in a state of continuous, often destructive conflict.
Then came the formidable Persian Empire, expanding across Asia Minor. Our sources share that fascinating tale of Croesus, king of Lydia, famous for his immense wealth.
Richest man in the world, supposedly.
Right. After consulting the oracles and getting these ambiguous answers about marching against the Persians, he ultimately faced defeat. Herodotus recounts Croesus's poignant encounter with the wise Solon, who warned him about the fleeting nature of happiness and wealth.
What did Solon say?
He stated, "No one is so senseless as to choose of his own will war rather than peace, since in peace the sons bury their fathers, but in war the fathers bury their sons."
Wow. Powerful words.
Incredibly powerful. Wisdom Croesus apparently remembered just as he was about to be burned alive by Cyrus, tragically underscored the consequences of his ambition and that universal truth about warfare.
A timeless message indeed. And the Persian threat only escalated after that. Darius, the Persian king, invaded South Russia against the Scythian nomads, and his agents were sent into Greece demanding submission. This really set the stage for the Persian Wars, a series of conflicts that profoundly defined the early Hellenic world.
We have the Battle of Marathon, where the Greeks famously repulsed the Persians in 490 BC.
A legendary victory.
Then the Thermopylae, where 1,400 men, the Spartans and other Greeks, fought to the last in that heroic stand. Salamis, where the Persian fleet was scattered and destroyed in a decisive naval battle.
Turning point at sea.
And finally, the battles of Plataea and Mycale, which ensured the decisive repulse of the Persian forces from mainland Greece.
After the Persian repulse, Athens entered a period of great prosperity, the famous Golden Age. But it was later smitten by the plague in 430 BC, which tragically killed Pericles.
A huge blow.
It was. Yet, amid these confusions and challenges, a significant intellectual movement was unfolding. The expedition of the 10,000 of Xenophon, those Greek mercenaries who marched deep into the Persian Empire and somehow got back, revealed the Persian Empire as a rich confusion which it would be very easy to conquer. That inspired new strategic and political ideas.
And Greek thought flourished with these towering figures. Socrates.
Condemned to drink hemlock for corrupting the youth with his relentless questioning of traditional wisdom, his ideas were foundational to Western philosophy.
Then Plato, his student. His clear reason and noble spirit led him to imagine a utopia, a perfect society where slavery would be abolished. A truly radical idea for his time.
Absolutely radical. And Aristotle, Plato's student, whom our sources call the first natural historian, emphasizing his commitment to ordered knowledge based on observation, really anticipating figures like Francis Bacon and the modern scientific movement.
Now, while all ancient nations had slaves, our sources note the Greeks were unique because they alone argued whether it was right to have them.
That's interesting.
Yeah. They're often described as maybe too soft in their treatment compared to the appalling cruelty seen in Carthage or Rome. Like when Crassus notoriously crucified 6,000 gladiators after the Spartacus revolt.
A brutal contrast.
This period of Greek reason and spirit led to a growing realization of human brotherhood, the needlessness of wars and cruelties and oppression, and a blossoming understanding of the possibilities of a common purpose for humankind. A remarkable intellectual leap.
Which brings us neatly to Philip of Macedon and his brilliant, famous son, Alexander the Great. Philip created the most efficient military organization the world had so far seen, turning his small, rather barbaric state into a great power and confederating most of Greece under his influence.
But his domestic life was tumultuous, wasn't it? Especially with Olympias, Alexander's fiery mother, and his new wife, Cleopatra.
Extremely tumultuous, Plutarch recounts this pitiful scene at Philip's marriage celebration, where much wine was drunk, leading to an angry outburst from Olympias, and Philip's subsequent murder in 336 BC. Set the stage for Alexander's dramatic rise.
Alexander rose at just 20 years old, immediately establishing himself as king. Olympias then reappeared, proudly vindicated. She allegedly paid the same funeral honors to Philip's murderer as to Philip himself and consecrated the fatal weapon.
Wow, quite the character.
Indeed. These excesses, though shocking to Alexander, didn't stop him from leaving her in a position of authority back in Macedonia. Alexander's military campaigns were swift, decisive. He sacked Thebes, smashing the city as a warning to other Greek states, though they mostly remained inert after that. He crushed Darius's army at Issus, treating Darius's captured harem with great respect, which perhaps revealed a more nuanced, maybe even better side to his complex character.
And his respectful treatment of Egyptian religion, unlike previous conquerors, also highlighted his strategic thinking, maybe even spiritual insights. Showed a willingness to incorporate rather than just subjugate.
This really speaks to Alexander's complexity, doesn't it? Our sources even mention his drunken quarrel, where he killed Clitus, a trusted friend. Illustrates how his saner and his crazy sides were in conflict. So what does all this mean for his lasting legacy?
Well, if we consider the broader impact, Alexander's career certainly drew together all the world from the Adriatic Sea right over to the Indus River. He effectively realized the dreams of thinkers like Isocrates and his father Philip of a united Hellenic world.
But was he a statesman or just a conqueror?
That's the question our sources raise. Was he a true statesman or merely a brilliant conqueror? They point out that places like Babylonia and Egypt already swarmed with Greeks before his time, suggesting he was part of an ongoing Hellenization process rather than its sole cause.
Okay.
His intellectual ambition, though, was clearly evident in establishing Alexandrias as centers of Hellenization. The great museum and library at Alexandria rivaled Pergamum's for intellectual preeminence. Alexandria became this great factory and exchange of religious ideas, specifically witnessing the syncretism, the blending of Egyptian and Greek gods like Serapis and Isis. This formed what was called theocrasia, where different aspects of deities merged, creating new cults, new beliefs.
A blending of culture.
Exactly. That was a significant, maybe unintended outcome of his conquests, even if he didn't fully realize a permanent, enduring political union. And we shouldn't forget the environmental context either. The sources mention the drying up and elevation of Central Asia over thousands of years, a gradual process that forced nomadic movements, shaping the populations and interactions Alexander encountered. Hashtag 3.4 Roman Carthage. A struggle for dominance.
Okay, now let's turn to the West, with the rise of Rome and its massive clash with Carthage. The Romans started as a community of independent farmers, living on small holdings. Father and sons worked the land together, growing corn, raising cattle.
The classic Roman farmer image.
Right. Their fortified towns served as centers for religion and government. They gradually developed this unique form of government, a republic, where supreme power was vested in two annually elected consuls, chosen from the patrician, the aristocratic class.
And our sources describe a long, long struggle between these patricians and the plebeians, the common citizens. The plebeians eventually gained officers of their own, the tribunes and aediles, after what was called the first secession of the plebes from Rome in 494 BC.
A kind of strike.
Essentially, yes. In 486 BC, Spurius Cassius tried to implement an agrarian law to redistribute land to the plebeians, but he was condemned to death. Highlights the deep class divisions.
Wow.
This was followed by a struggle just to have Rome's laws written down, resulting in the seminal 12 Tables, a foundational legal code for Roman society. Later, figures like Camillus, initially appointed dictator to crush plebeian demands, instead brought about a compromise in 366 BC. He conceded most demands and dedicated a temple of Concord, symbolizing a period of greater unity.
What's particularly striking here is how new antagonisms gradually replaced those old-class oppositions as Roman power expanded beyond its immediate borders. The Senate, no longer purely patrician, became an assembly of all the wealthy, able, influential men, regardless of their original class.
A shift in the elite structure.
Yeah. And our sources draw a strong parallel between Rome and Athens in how they approached their growing empires. Athens, they say, pursued this tax the foreigner policy and used allied funds to beautify its capital, which ultimately made it disliked, envied by its subjects. Rome, by contrast, had no such simple guiding principle initially, but its shrewder, nobler senators were at first willing to share privileges, fostering a more collaborative, if still unequal, relationship with conquered peoples.
However, our sources also highlight an unanticipated weakness in Rome's political life: the popular assembly.
What was the problem?
Due to the mechanical difficulties of non-city voters participating in person, you had to be there to vote, it became more and more a gathering of political hacks and the city riffraff, and less a representation of the ordinary citizens from across Roman territory.
So dominated by the city mob.
Increasingly so. Furthermore, the augurs, the priests of divination, conducted this unintelligible ritual around voting, further complicating matters and potentially manipulating outcomes. This created a growing political instability that would have really grave consequences for the Republic.
And this political instability set the stage for the Punic Wars, a series of conflicts that severely tested Rome's moral strength and revealed, as our sources starkly put it, a homicidal monomania.
Strong words.
Very strong. The First Punic War, starting in 264 BC, saw Rome, despite Carthage's long-standing sea power, astonishingly defeat the Carthaginian fleet. Naval architecture had developed significantly since Salamis. Huge warships called quinqueremes, massive galleys with 5 banks of oars, were now the leading battleships, showcased significant technological advancement in naval power.
The consequences for Carthage were dire: the breakup of its sea law, leading to rampant Illyrian piracy, and Rome's opportunistic annexation of Sardinia and Corsica while Carthage was dealing with mutinies. And our sources state very clearly that the Second and Third Punic Wars, 219 to 201 BC and 149-046 BC, were not battles of sane peoples.
What do they mean by that?
They say the red eyes of the ancestral ape had come back into the world, reflecting a regression to primitive savagery. It was a time when reasonable men were howled down or murdered. Human victims were even sacrificed in Rome during the panic before one battle. It truly was a time black with homicidal monomania.
Chilling. And the specifics of the Second Punic War are just epic. Hannibal, the brilliant Carthaginian general,
Legendary figure.
he organized Spain as his base, marched his army, including war elephants over the Alps, and won these great victories at Lake Trasimene and Cannae, where he utterly destroyed vastly superior Roman forces.
Monster tactician.
But crucially, despite these battlefield triumphs, he was unable to conduct sieges effectively against heavily fortified cities, left him kind of in the air without a secure base in Italy.
The war culminated in the Battle of Zama in 22 BC. Scipio Africanus, with vital help from Numidian cavalry, finally defeated Hannibal on African soil. An event so significant, our sources note, it was fixed by an eclipse during the fighting.
Wow.
Rome then imposed these exorbitant conditions on Carthage, leading to its eventual total destruction in the Third Punic War. A war relentlessly driven by figures like Cato the Censor, who famously ended every speech with "Carthago delenda est," Carthage must be destroyed.
Obsessed.
Completely. Scipio Africanus, by contrast, was described as generous, impatient, disinclined to exploit his popularity. He eventually retired from politics in disgust and died in the same year as Hannibal, 183 BC. A testament to his character, perhaps.
So the Roman Republic, which our sources describe rather unflatteringly as a Neanderthal variety of a modern democratic state, ultimately failed.
A harsh assessment.
It is. They point to the incurable disposition of politicians to gerrymander the electoral machine, to manipulate electoral districts for political gain, as a key reason the masses drifted towards unconstitutional methods. For insurrection, a discontented population needs a leader, and the final century of the Republic saw this succession of ambitious generals vying for power.
The rise of the strong men.
Exactly. We hear of the Gracchi brothers attempting land reforms, Tiberius Gracchus brutally beaten to death by senators with a broken bench,
Vicious politics.
and the ensuing military pronunciamentos, declarations by military leaders taking power. Marius's reign of terror saw the abolition of 3/4 of all debts, a desperate measure to relieve social tension.
Then the sources recount Crassus's defeat by the Parthians, these mobile horsemen from the Altai and Tian Shan mountains whose singing arrows were particularly devastating, destroyed his army.
And Antony, meanwhile, succumbed to divine kingship with Cleopatra, adopting elaborate Eastern court rituals, led to Octavian's rise and the decisive Battle of Actium.
The endgame.
Octavian then became princeps, meaning first citizen, but in effect an autocrat, brought the Republic to its formal end, ushered in the empire.
Which raises that important question. Why did this first great experiment in self-government on such a large scale collapse?
What do the sources say?
They suggest a profound reason. Rome's failure to develop any intellectual imagination to hold her empire together, any general education in common ideas. The rich, they argue, had eaten the heart out of their general population, content with their own gains, unwilling to foster shared purpose or widespread education.
Wow. A sobering thought about the longevity of empires, isn't it? And the crucial role of shared understanding, civic engagement. So the Roman imperial system, even though it had a couple of centuries of prosperity under emperors like Trajan, it was ultimately a very unsound political growth.
Flawed from the start, perhaps.
It seems like it. It was characterized as an age of spending rather than creation, where the rich grew richer and the poor poorer, and the soul and spirit of man decayed. Our sources are blunt. It lacked true statecraft. Its bureaucratic administration, even at its best, only managed to keep the peace for a time, failing completely to secure it in the long run.
Indeed. The Augustan age, while culturally significant, produced mostly imitative literature like Virgil's Aeneid, which modestly but resolutely paralleled Homer, but it lacked profound originality. The empire also saw this blend of Eastern and Western influences due to its vast reach.
Like what?
Our sources specifically mention the Indo-Scythians, various nomadic peoples, probably Mongolian races, who conquered northern parts of India, wiping out the last traces of Hellenic rule left from Alexander's time. And behind them were the Huns, whose westward movements across Asia influenced the Parthians and other nomadic peoples, creating this domino effect of migrations and conflicts hitting the empire's borders.
What's particularly striking here is the complete barbarization of the Roman Empire in the West, as the sources put it. We see the Visigoths, Vandals, Alans, Suevi-Germanic, and nomadic tribes marching freely westward, often just living off the land.
The invasions.
Yes, culminating in Alaric's capture and sack of Rome in 410 AD, a truly monumental event amidst the broader confusion and collapse.
This period marked the utter social decay and collapse of the slave-holding world ascendancy of the god Caesars and the wealthy elite of Rome. Credit vanished, luxury declined, the sophisticated structures of the empire just crumbled.
But the East held on.
In stark contrast, yes. The Eastern or Byzantine Empire, centered in Constantinople, showed remarkable resilience. It held out for nearly 1,000 years longer than the West. It maintained a Hellenic tradition under a nominal Roman guise, though its official language eventually became Greek, made it more truly a continuation of Alexander's Hellenic Empire than of strict Roman tradition.
And our sources suggest that Latin, the language of the Western Empire, lacked the intellectual vigor and a strong tradition of literature and science to be considered a necessity for intelligent people, unlike Greek. It sounds like a cautionary tale, doesn't it, about the power of ideas and intellectual depth over just brute force or administrative power. When Rome fell, its intellectual foundations were already pretty weak. Hashtag 4.2, the rise of Christianity and monasticism.
Amidst this decline of the Roman Empire, new spiritual forces were profoundly emerging. We've talked about that overflow of moral ideas from the Hebrew prophets, and now we come to Christianity. Our sources derive most of what we know about Jesus from the four Gospels, all certainly existing a few decades after his death, and from allusions in early Christian propaganda. Provides crucial insights into his life and teachings.
And the teachings of Jesus, as detailed in the Gospels, were quite radical for their time, weren't they?
Extremely radical. He rejected traditional patriotism and family loyalty for a universal brotherhood, famously declaring that, "Whosoever shall do the will of God, the same is my brother and my sister and mother."
Challenging social norms.
Directly. He condemned all gradations of the economic system, all private wealth, stating that all their possessions belonged to the kingdom, and the only righteous life was complete service of God's will with all one had. He also flouted formalism, particularly rigid Sabbath observance. His political bent, while present, was unique. His kingdom was not of this world, and he rejected worldly power for his followers.
Which raises an important question. How did a faith that seemed to reject worldly structures become so central to reshaping Europe?
Paul's interpretation of Jesus' message was crucial, according to the sources. He shifted it from primarily a doctrine of motive and a way of living to a doctrine of belief, with the beginnings of a formal creed.
Paul, who hadn't met Jesus in person.
Correct. Paul explained the crucifixion as a completely satisfactory explanation for the disaster, building Jesus' doctrine of a new birth into this subtle, ingenious theological system. This led to the development of complex Christian dogma, exemplified by things like the Athanasian Creed, a foundational statement of belief, and its intricate controversies over the nature of God. The sources actually describe these controversies as a disastrous outpouring of the human mind because they were so divisive.
dogma leading to division.
Often. This new dogmatism was then met with persecution by emperors like Diocletian, who viewed the Christians' obstinacy and refusal to worship imperial gods as dangerous to the state. He ordered their churches demolished, punished secret assemblies with death.
Then came Constantine the Great, a party symbol, our sources say, whose personality is phantom-like in historical records. Hard to pin down.
A pivotal figure, though.
Absolutely. Humble birth, but displayed great prodigality in public buildings, wore magnificent robes like later emperors. His intent for Constantinople to be the center of an undivided empire was clear, but his most profound impact was his role in the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, which he convened to try and settle those controversies over Christian dogma and unify the burgeoning church.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the idea of worldly rule by the church was already prevalent, notably articulated by St. Augustine in his seminal work, The City of God, written between 354 and 430 AD. This work profoundly expressed the church's developing political ideas. In a few centuries, the Pope became, in theory and to a certain extent in practice, the high priest, censor, judge, and divine monarch of Christendom.
Wow, quite a role.
Huge influence, extending far beyond the old Roman Empire's reach to Ireland, Norway, Sweden, all of Germany. For more than 1,000 years, this developing idea of the unity of Christendom as a vast amphictyony, that league bound by common religious interests like ancient Greek federations, acted as a powerful force, restraining war, extremism, promoting a sense of common brotherhood.
And following the Roman collapse in the West, we see the remarkable rise of Christian monastic orders.
Filling a vacuum, perhaps?
Maybe. These were entirely new in concept. The Essenes, a Jewish sect before Jesus, had lived apart in communal settlements. Benedict of Nursia, a pivotal figure, famously lived in a cave, gathered disciples, much like Buddha had 1,000 years earlier. His fame spread, his story got overlaid with tales of miracles, attracting many followers to his ascetic way of life.
And Benedict's monasteries became true centers of light, actively restoring, maintaining, raising the intellectual and spiritual life of the West during a time of immense social breakdown and disorder. We also learn about Cassiodorus, who founded a monastery after a considerable official career under the Gothic kings.
What did he do?
He set his monks to work in a Benedictine fashion and, crucially, produced a series of school books on the liberal arts and a grammar. Made monasticism a powerful instrument for restoring social order and preserving learning in the chaotic Western world. Hashtag 4.3 the world of Islam. A new impulse.
So just as Western Europe was in this phase of adversity and extreme conditions, a new, incredibly powerful force emerged down in Arabia. Islam.
Founded by Muhammad, revered by his followers as the prophet of God.
Our sources describe Arabia as the land of origin of Semitic peoples, a vast land mostly of nomads and traders, except for that fertile strip of Yemen in the south.
Muhammad himself was a trader, familiar with Christian churches in Syria, with Jewish communities. He observed the widespread paganism of Mecca with its 300 tribal gods, which apparently profoundly oppressed his mind.
So he saw monotheism elsewhere.
He likely absorbed a belief in the one true God from his interactions with Jews and Christians. His early followers included his wife Khadijah, an adopted son Ali, a slave Zayd, and his close friend Abu Bakr. Initially, it was just an obscure sect in Mecca, but it gradually gathered strength as Muhammad began to preach openly, threatening idolaters with hellfire. This led some to suspect he aimed at a dictatorship, sparking early resistance.
This prophetic message led to increasing persecution in Mecca. Although Mecca was traditionally a sanctuary where no blood could be shed, Muhammad's followers faced boycott, confiscation of property. Some even took refuge in Christian Abyssinia, but the prophet himself, being well connected through his clan, went largely unscathed for a time.
What's truly fascinating here is the Hijra, Muhammad's migration from Mecca to Medina in 622 AD. This marked what our sources call the end of his probation and the beginning of his power.
A turning point.
A major turning point. In Medina, Muhammad's leadership blossomed. He dealt with opponents, including Jewish tribes, faced the Battle of Uhud and indecisive defeat, but he persevered. Muhammad himself is described as, without doubts, with beliefs cut down to acts cleanly as a sharp knife, indicates a clear, decisive character that appealed to his followers.
And after his death?
When he died in 632 AD, it was Abu Bakr who succeeded him as caliph, or successor. Abu Bakr's unflinching confidence and pragmatic leadership prevented a critical split between Mecca and Medina, consolidating the nascent Islamic state. though the caliphate soon transformed from that man of fire and wonder leadership into more of an oriental monarch like many before and since.
Power struggles followed.
Yes, the later murder of Othman and Ali's subsequent claims illustrate the less noble aspects, the squalid bickering of heirs and widows that followed this transformation.
And then came the Abbasid dynasty.
Yeah.
They overthrew the Umayyads in 750 AD, established Baghdad as a new capital.
A golden age for Islam.
In many ways, yes. This was a pivotal period where the Arab mind was in effective contact with Sanskrit literature and Indian ideas. They derived much knowledge, especially in math and science. This intellectual interaction led to distinguished historians, poets. Arabic became the language of educated men throughout the Muslim world.
And we hear of legendary figures like Harun al-Rashid, the Abbasid caliph from 786-809. His importance was both real and legendary, as depicted in the Arabian Nights. His court in Baghdad became this beacon of learning and culture, signifying a new, powerful impulse in the world. Hashtag 4.4 Christendom and the Crusades.
So what did the Western world look like at its lowest ebb back in the 8th century?
Our sources paint a bleak picture. A shattered civilization in Europe, a complete breakdown of law, education, roads destroyed, social structures disorganized.
But not total barbarism.
Not quite like Eastern Europe, which remained more wild and savage. This widespread chaos in the West ultimately led to the development of the feudal system. People placed themselves under the protection of adjacent nobles in exchange for service, forming this localized system of governance out of necessity.
This period also saw the rise of the Frankish kingdom. Pepin was crowned king in 751, consolidating what our sources call Franco-Germany, then held together by his brilliant son Charlemagne, who forged this vast but ultimately temporary empire.
Right, the Carolingian Empire.
But after the death of Charlemagne's grandson Louis in 840, France and Germany broke away again. Not due to distinct racial differences, the sources say, but due to growing differences in language and tradition.
Meanwhile, the Christianization of the English progressed, and Northumbrian monasteries in northern England became vibrant centers of light and learning, preserving knowledge, fostering intellectual life. Theodore of Tarsus, an early Archbishop of Canterbury, was a key figure in this intellectual revival, bringing classical and biblical knowledge to the region.
This brings up an important question. How did the papacy, often in conflict with Byzantine emperors, gain such profound power and influence in the West?
Well, the crowning of Charlemagne as Emperor of the West in 800 AD by Pope Leo III was a truly pivotal moment.
Why did that happen?
The Pope had appealed to Charlemagne for protection against a conspiracy in Rome. This act effectively created the Holy Roman Empire, a concept which, as our sources state, was from the beginning a divided thing of uncertain power, a claim and an argument rather than a necessary reality.
Always unstable.
Pretty much. The German sword was always clattering into Italy, and papal legates toiling in reverse, but the Germans could never hold Italy permanently, partly due to challenges like malaria. The sources also detail the widespread lawlessness and power struggles in the 9th and 10th centuries. Hugh Capet founded a new dynasty in France. Otto I became the first Saxon emperor, resuming that ancient tussle between pope and emperor for ultimate authority.
And beyond these internal struggles, there were new waves of formidable invaders hitting Europe.
More disruption.
Yes. The Northmen, Gothic, and Nordic peoples established powerful realms in Normandy, England, even Russia, traveling far along river routes. Then came a new westward thrust of the Turkish peoples, including the Seljuk Turks, migrating from Central Asia, and the Hungarians.
Magyars.
Right. They eventually settled in the Carpathian Basin, were Christianized, but notably kept their distinctive Turco-Finnic language. These incursions brought further disruption, but also new populations, cultural exchanges.
And then came the Crusades, sparked by an appeal from Constantinople to Rome for aid against those Seljuk Turks. Our sources highlight this as the first unhappy appearance of the people as people in modern European history, as vast untrained masses joined the call.
What was the Pope's motivation?
Pope Urban II skillfully seized the opportunity, it seems, to unite Western Europe, hoping to end persistent private warfare and channel this immense religious enthusiasm outwards.
The First Crusade launched in 1096. It saw an initial massacre of untrained people, didn't it? A disorderly rabble led by figures like Peter the Hermit, largely annihilated.
Yes, the People's Crusade, a disaster.
Followed by more organized forces, primarily Normans, who crossed the Bosphorus, captured Nicaea, Antioch, and finally Jerusalem on July 15th, 1099.
But the sources grimly describe the terrible slaughter at Jerusalem where blood of the conquered ran down the streets.
A brutal conquest.
Extremely. And what's fascinating here is how the Latin clergy immediately seized authority in Jerusalem, creating intense conflict with the local Orthodox Christians,
Okay.
highlighted deep-seated sectarian tensions right away. The nakedly apparent struggle between the Latin Western Christian system and the Byzantine Eastern Orthodox system became central to the Crusader states.
And the papacy itself.
While gaining increasing legal power and influence, it was simultaneously losing its grip upon men's consciences, becoming less persuasive and more violent in its methods.
Interesting paradox.
It is. This is exemplified by Emperor Frederick II, who challenged papal absolutism and even embarked on a Pacific crusade in 1228. He negotiated a treaty restoring Jerusalem to Christian rule without military conquest, a stark contrast to earlier crusades.
We also learn about the Franciscan order, founded by St. Francis of Assisi. Lived a life of extreme poverty, dedicated service to the sick, particularly lepers.
A powerful spiritual movement.
His order grew rapidly, becoming a major force for evangelism and charity. But it also experienced internal struggles and heresies over its commitment to poverty, foreshadowing later troubles and divisions within Christendom.
And then came what our sources call the last and greatest of all the raids of nomadism, the Mongols under Genghis Khan in the 13th century.
Mongol hordes.
Their vast empire, stretching from the Pacific Right to the Dnieper River in Europe, was purely military and administrative, focused relentlessly on taxation and control.
But they didn't conquer all of Europe.
No, Europe was miraculously relieved from their direct threat only because of dynastic troubles back at Karakorum, the Mongol capital, which caused them to retreat. The sources note the missionary failures of the papacy in Mongolia, stating that Christianity was losing its persuasive power in the face of such a formidable alien culture.
This period also brought us Marco Polo. His astonishing travels to China, Cathay, he called it, capital Campilac, modern Beijing, became legendary.
Il Milione.
Right, his nickname, the Million, because he spoke of millions of people and ducats. He even served as governor of Yangzhou for 3 years under Kublai Khan. His stories, initially met with raised eyebrows, eventually encouraged European enterprise enormously by stimulating intense interest in the wealth and advanced civilization of East Asia.
A crucial step towards true global awareness, spurring future exploration. So we've seen how centuries were dominated by these cyclic changes between refreshment by nomadic conquest, civilization, decadence, and fresh conquest, profoundly shaping the world. But now something fundamentally new begins, a mutual blending of civilized and free tendencies into a new type of community.
A new synthesis.
Sort of. History, our sources propose, is the slow development of larger human communities, where the age-old conflict between will, which the sources describe as participating obedience to authority, and knowledge, gradually began to reconcile, leading to new forms of social organization.
So what does this gradual reconciliation lead to? What's the core distinction of the modern state that emerges from these changes?
Our sources say it's the practical realization of this idea that education is a collective function and not a private affair.
Education as a public good.
Exactly. This marks a profound shift from a community of faith and obedience to a community of knowledge and will, with education serving as the crucial adapter. They emphasize that before a citizen can meaningfully vote or decide, they must be informed. They state, votes in themselves are worthless things. Men had votes in Italy in the time of the Gracchi. Their votes did not help them. Highlighting that political power without informed engagement is pretty meaningless.
A powerful point. This intellectual transformation was also profoundly fueled by figures like John Wycliffe in England, active around 1320-1384. He famously translated the Bible into English to set up a counter-authority to that of the Pope, making religious texts accessible to ordinary people.
Empowering the laity.
Right. He denounced the Mass, challenged central church doctrines, contributed to the intellectual ferment that would lead to the Reformation. While there was an irreligious revolt of princes against church rule, driven by political, economic motives, there was also an essentially religious revolt of the people who genuinely objected to the church's weaknesses and wanted a deeply righteous and fearless church.
And here's a pivotal technological development from our sources. Paper made the revival of Europe possible.
Paper. Seems so simple now.
But revolutionary then. Originating in China, its use probably goes back to the 2nd century BC. The crucial art of papermaking was learned from Chinese prisoners after a clash with Arab Muslims in Samarkand in 751. This technology, combined with the development of printing, even if only partially used before paper was widespread, revolutionized the dissemination of knowledge.
Made books cheaper, faster.
Exactly. It allowed for a widespread intellectual attack upon the priest as priest, and fueled a popular demand for a return to Jesus' personal teachings, bypassing traditional intermediaries.
Amidst these sweeping changes, new forces within the church also arose. Ignatius of Loyola, a Spanish nobleman, founded the Jesuits in 1534,
The Society of Jesus.
a powerful missionary and educational organization that carried Christianity and European learning to distant lands like China and India, became a major force in the Counter-Reformation. Concurrently, we see the reawakening of science. Figures like Roger Bacon back in the 13th century, his pioneering ideas began to bear fruit in the 15th.
Then as the 16th century dawned, this galaxy of names emerged. Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, Newton, leading to a widening outlook, fundamentally changing humanity's understanding of the universe.
Our sources also note the changing perception of European identity, stating it's kind of a phantom difference created by two names for parts of a continuous landmass.
Challenging arbitrary division.
And the growth of towns, the influence of the Renaissance, brought greater house comfort, new domestic technologies. Life was changing on multiple levels.
And then the world literally expanded. The fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks in 1453 and the continuous Turkish pressure disrupted established overland trade routes with the East, prompted a desperate search for new maritime routes.
Which led to Columbus's voyages, his relentless search for a western route to Asia. He initially despaired for Spanish help, even sent his brother to Henry VII of England, but, as our sources note, the adventure didn't attract that canny monarch.
Too risky for Henry.
Apparently. Columbus famously died ignorant that he'd discovered a new continent, believing he'd sailed around the world to Asia.
The news of his discoveries, though, caused immense excitement throughout Western Europe, spurred the Portuguese to new attempts to reach India via the South African route.
And Vasco da Gama succeeded.
In 1497, yes, Vasco da Gama successfully sailed from Lisbon to Zanzibar and then, with an Arab pilot, across the Indian Ocean to Calicut, opened up that direct sea route to Asia. Spain's century-long dominance from the 16th century onward was largely due to its monopoly of American gold and silver flowing into its coffers.
Changed the economic balance of power.
Fundamentally, shifted Europe's center of interest from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic. Close on the heels of Portugal and Spain came France, England, Holland, each taking up the role of overseas expansion and empire building, fundamentally reshaping global power dynamics, setting the stage for centuries of imperial rivalry. Hashtag 5.2, the Industrial Revolution and Social Change.
This global expansion then led directly to a fresh phase of history, the Mechanical Revolution.
The Industrial Revolution.
Exactly. In little more than a century, humanity made this stride in the material conditions of his life vaster than he had done during the whole long interval between the Paleolithic stage and the Age of Cultivation, or even between ancient Egypt and George III's time.
An astonishing leap. A new, gigantic material framework for human affairs came into existence.
And the beginnings of this revolution were surprisingly practical, weren't they?
Very practical. The exhaustion of wood for England's burgeoning ironworks led to the necessity of using coal.
Needed a new fuel source.
Right. This, in turn, required powerful pumping engines to drain the deeper mines. James Watt's pivotal development of the pumping engine into a versatile machine-driving engine then led to locomotives and steamships.
This is a profound shift. Our sources highlight that earlier Roman civilization was built on cheap and degraded human beings, slavery, while modern civilization was being rebuilt on cheap mechanical power. For 100 years, power has been getting cheaper and labor dearer, profoundly altering economic structures, social relations.
And our sources reveal something interesting. The factory method, as a system of organizing labor, actually came before widespread power machinery.
Really?
It was a product of the division of labor. Drilled and sweated workers making things like millinery, cardboard boxes, even before water wheels were commonly used for industrial processes. Factories, in a rudimentary form, even existed in Rome during Augustus's time. But the modern factory system, as it emerged, gathered up infantile child labor and made it systematic, conspicuous, utterly scandalous. Directly challenged the quickening human conscience, prompted calls for reform.
Which raises an important question about how humanity responded to such profound social changes. These new problems needed new solutions.
Absolutely. Our sources highlight the British Factory Act of 1819. Though weak and feeble by today's standards, it was truly the Magna Carta of childhood, marked the very beginning of protecting poor children from exploitation.
Landmark, even if small.
A crucial first step. The sources suggest that massive movements of ordinary people only became possible as a result of propagandist religions like Christianity and Islam, with their insistence upon individual self-respect and worth, provided a moral framework for social change.
So religion played a role in social reform.
It enabled it, perhaps. This sense of individual worth contributed to a growing sense of solidarity between all sorts of poor and propertyless men, blurring old differences between craftsmen and outdoor workers, black coats and overalls, as they realized their shared economic plight.
Early socialism emerged from this.
Well, early socialism, like that proposed by Robert Owen, wasn't democratic initially. It was benevolent, essentially a master's movement to educate and uplift workers through enlightened management.
Paternalistic.
Very. Concurrently, trade unions developed. Initially illegal combinations, they gained freedom for collective bargaining in 1824, allowed workmen to form combinations to negotiate with masters for better conditions, wages.
Our sources define collectivism, or socialism, as the collective ownership of land, all natural means of production, transit, distribution, while still allowing for free private ownership within certain limits.
A mixed economy model.
Seems like it. The sources imply that with efficient administration, this proposal might not be widely disputed today, suggesting its practical viability.
On a different note, the profound impact of Darwinism during this era that caused dismay and distress among ordinary intelligent people.
Why?
By challenging orthodox Christian cosmogony, the traditional biblical account of creation. It led to that classic apes or angels line from the Earl of Beaconsfield. Prime Minister Gladstone also weighed in, reflected the profound intellectual, cultural upheaval as science challenged established beliefs. Hashtag 5.3 Reshaping Nations and Empires, 19th century.
With the old order breaking down, new ideologies emerging, new political figures also came to prominence, often described by our sources as adventurers and wreckers. Epitomized, perhaps, by Napoleon Bonaparte.
A towering figure, for good or ill.
Born in Corsica in 1769, an ardent Republican Jacobin supporter, rose rapidly through the ranks, gaining his first distinction, commanding artillery at Toulon.
His early victories, like those in Italy, stimulated a vast expansion of his vanity. He was a great reader of Plutarch's Lives, Roman history. His extremely active but totally uncreative imagination, the sources say, was busy with dreams of a new Roman revival.
But uncreative, that seems harsh.
Well, the sources suggest he was more about imposing old models than innovating new political structures. He had a cynical view of religion, considering it merely excellent stuff for keeping the common people quiet.
Pragmatic? Maybe ruthless?
He instituted the Legion of Honor, a scheme for decorating Frenchmen with ribbons, distinctions. Admirably calculated, the sources say, to divert ambitious men from subversive proceedings by channeling their energy into patriotic accolades. His actions, however, eventually alienated both Catholic and liberal opinion until he ultimately stood at last for nothing but himself, a testament to his increasing egocentrism.
So what's the core distinction of this new age of leadership that Napoleon embodies? How did he change things?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Napoleon's career marks the beginning of a new phase in the relationship between powerful individuals and the masses. He was, our sources state, free from self-deception, forced to either serve or destroy. His ambitious foreign policy then plunged Europe into a fresh cycle of wars.
Like the planned invasion of Britain.
Famously assembled that vast army at Bologna for it. After a great victory at Dresden in 1813, he seems to have gone to pieces intellectually and morally, became insanely irritable, had periods of alarming inaction.
The decline.
Yes. The Battle of the Nations at Leipzig later that year saw his former allies turn decisively against him, driving the French back into France.
And after his death, this cult of the Napoleonic grew up, offered a kind of refuge from self-deception for many, allowing people to believe he'd mystically asserted the revolution's ideals.
Power of myth.
Highlights the ongoing human need for heroic figures, even flawed ones, to project ideals upon. After Napoleon's final defeat, the Congress of Vienna in 1815 tried to impose a new order on Europe.
The Restoration.
But it largely resulted in an uneasy peace and dull oppression. The unscientific map-making of the diplomatists created future stresses, binding dissimilar peoples like Norwegians and Swedes under one king, confirming Austria's Polish acquisitions, effectively destroying Polish freedom.
Tsar Alexander of Russia, despite his piety and self-satisfaction, expanded his empire, annexing Finland, confirmed in his Polish acquisitions. The Holy Alliance, an agreement among conservative monarchs, aimed to maintain this established order.
But it was countered by President Monroe's prompt action in 1823,
Ah, the Monroe Doctrine.
led to its declaration preventing European monarchs from assisting Spain in reconquering South America, asserted a new American influence in the Western Hemisphere.
This period also saw the dramatic unification of Italy and Germany, driven by different forces with profound long-term consequences for Europe.
How did Italy unify?
Italy was unified under King Victor Emmanuel II and his astute chief minister Cavour. The charismatic revolutionary Garibaldi played a key role, liberating Sicily and Naples, led to the establishment of the First Kingdom of Italy in 1861.
And Germany.
Germany's unification was largely due to Otto von Bismarck's ruthless and disingenuous statesmanship. He masterminded the use of the Danish War, deliberately picked a quarrel with Austria to achieve Hohenzollern ascendancy, the dominance of the Prussian monarchy, laid crucial groundwork for the First World War, according to the sources.
And the sources indicate that European governments, released from their terror of a worldwide insurrection, quickly resumed the game of great powers. Back to geopolitical competition.
Back to business as usual in a way. And beyond Europe, the second scramble for overseas empires was in full swing, especially in India, where the mechanical revolution quietly abolished the great distance between India and Britain through steamships, telegraphs.
Made control easier.
Much easier. The British East India Company's growing empire, through its increasing interference in Indian domestic life, led to terrible events like the massacre of an unarmed gathering at Amritsar in 1919. Nearly 2,000 killed or wounded by British troops. A stark reminder of colonial brutality.
Meanwhile, improvements in transport also boosted Australian wool exports, facilitated Canadian expansion, particularly with the railway enabling westward growth.
Across the Pacific, Japan experienced this remarkable renaissance and rapid westernization, completely dispelled the long-held idea that Asia was hopelessly behind Europe.
Well, so?
Exemplified by its stunning victory in the war with China in 1894-95. Showed it was a rapidly modernizing power.
And by 1914, the British Empire encompassed incredibly diverse forms, didn't it?
Absolutely. From direct rule in India to self-governing communities like Malta and Jamaica, crown colonies like Ceylon and Trinidad, showcasing its vast global reach and complex administrative structure.
So, leading up to the Great War, our sources describe how Prussianism was deeply poured into young Germans through school, church, literature, fostering this fervent belief in German leadership, a conviction that Prussians were the leaders and regenerators of mankind.
Intense nationalism.
Extremely. Even lectures in biology or math, we're told, would often break off for long passages of royalist patriotic rant. Shows how pervasive this ideology was.
However, with the spread of education, industrialization, organized labor developed powerful opposing ideas. The Social Democrats, a new political party professing Marxist doctrines, grew rapidly despite state repression.
And the Kaiser.
Kaiser Wilhelm II, afflicted with a son and heir even more imperialistic than himself, directly contributed to a naval arms race. Stubbornly refused British proposals to halt construction in 1913, created intense rivalry, pushed the continent closer to war.
On the other hand, imperialist ideas in Britain, fueled by the cheap popular press, made the army splendidly important in the public imagination.
But there's an intriguing contrast, isn't there? German imperialism was deeply centered on the crown, the heir apparent, while the British king stood aloof. Imperial ambition often driven by popular sentiment, economic interests, rather than direct royal decree.
This leads us to consider how seemingly domestic issues could reflect larger imperial struggles. The Irish question, for instance.
A long and troubled history.
Illuminates a century of stupid misgovernment by Britain, leading to appalling consequences like the devastating potato famine, mass emigration, particularly to the U.S. The Act of Union in 1800 joined the Irish and British parliaments, both deeply corrupt at the time. The struggle for home rule self-governance was ongoing. Gladstone's efforts rejected by the House of Lords in 1893, perpetuating resentment.
Then the Ulster Sedition saw Sir Edward Carson and F.E. Smith openly arming volunteers, inciting armed resistance against home rule, set a dangerous precedent for defiance of parliamentary decisions.
And the sources describe the grosser insult of the stark contrast in treatment.
Between the Ulster rebels and the Dublin ones.
Exactly. Ulster rebel leaders treated leniently, while deliberate and clumsy sternness was used against the Dublin insurrectionists in 1916. Many were mere boys, summarily shot.
That shocking disparity completely wrecked any hope of reconciliation, fueled further cycles of violence.
And as tensions mounted across Europe, Our sources suggest England's connivance at French occupation of Morocco.
To pacify them over Egypt.
Yes, that profoundly contributed to Germany's bristling attitude. Germany had long viewed Morocco as its potential share of North Africa, felt it deserved colonial territory there.
Created this complex web of international resentments, mutual suspicions, ultimately brought Europe to the brink of a catastrophic war.
And then, in August 1914, the storm of the Great War burst upon the world.
The Schlieffen Plan.
The German plan, yes, involved an outrage upon the law of nations by invading neutral Belgium. On the night of August 2nd, the Belgian village of Visay was set ablaze. Unarmed civilians shot for alleged firing on invaders.
Marked a deliberate, melodramatic frightfulness in German military tactics designed to inspire terror.
The Germans also quickly resorted to horrifying innovations like poison gas, unrestricted submarine warfare, escalated the brutality of the conflict immensely.
The initial German advance pushed the little British expeditionary force aside, swept down to crumple the French army. So confident was the German high command that by late August, troops were already being withdrawn for the Eastern Front. Because the Russians were initially playing havoc with early successes there. But then came the French counterattack, strategically very swift and brilliant at the Battle of the Marne.
Pushed the Germans back from Paris, saved the capital.
Crucial moment. However, the inferior and unimaginative professional military mind then obstinately neglected the possibilities of the tanks.
Even though a working model already existed in England.
Incredible, isn't it? This critical neglect, coupled with initial British failures, brought the Allied cause to the very brink of disaster, highlighted a shocking failure of foresight in military leadership.
Subsidiary campaigns also unfolded across the globe. Mesopotamia. General Townshend's British army surrounded, starved into surrender at Kut.
Romania suffered the same fate as Serbia, overrun by the Central Powers. On the Eastern Front, the Russians were indeed playing havoc initially, but the French and British press, despite their own struggles, pestered their exhausted ally for a fresh offensive, ignoring their immense casualties, logistical challenges.
And the British Admiralty quailed before the prospect of a Baltic expedition, failing to open a vital sea route.
So the new Russian Republic, born from revolution, had to fight largely unsupported, despite the Allies' great naval predominance, highlighted a significant lack of decisive strategic coordination. Hashtag 6.2 the aftermath, and attempts at peace.
The war finally ended. An amazingly swift collapse of Hohenzollern and Habsburg forces. German resistance just evaporated, their army's fighting spirit gone by October 1918.
The aftermath wasn't joy, was it?
No. The sources describe it as aimless, with a kind of strained and aching relief. People were simply too exhausted to truly laugh or weep.
The economic confusion across Europe was profound. Wildly fluctuating international exchange rates, soaring prices, widespread wage earner distress, plagued economies, led to a catastrophic loss of confidence in the currency itself.
And private enterprise.
Our sources explicitly state that private enterprise in Europe in 1919 displayed neither will nor capacity for meeting the crying needs of the time. As soon as it was released from wartime controls, it ran naturally into profiteering and social disorganization, just exacerbating the crisis.
So this fundamental failure of the private sector meant there was little or no hope for decent housing, clothing, education for workers for generations. Laid the groundwork for future unrest.
Which raises an important question. How did America, initially detached, become such a central figure in the search for peace?
President Woodrow Wilson.
Exactly. Described by our sources as the spokesman of a new age, put forward his famous 14 points for peace in January 1918.
What were the key points?
Called for open diplomacy, freedom of the seas, removal of economic barriers, reduction of armaments, among others. These ideals received an immense reception throughout the world, seen as a blueprint for a peace for reasonable men.
But the reality of the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, it quickly devolved into what our sources characterize as some old-fashioned diplomatic conspiracy.
Not the open forum Wilson envisioned.
No. It shrank from a council of 10, representing the major powers, to a council of 4, Wilson, Clemenceau, Lloyd George, Orlando. Became less a frank, open discussion, more a secret negotiation among a powerful few.
And the resulting map-making was unscientific. Driven by nationalistic demands rather than ethnic realities, inevitably led to future disputes.
Like Italy insisting on acquiring subject populations of Germans in southern Tyrol, Yugoslavs in Dalmatia, Greece landing troops in Asia Minor, claiming territory there.
And even Wilson himself, the champion of self-determination, gave way to the Japanese over Kiaochao, which was Chinese property, conceded it to Japan despite its rightful ownership.
And the League of Nations Covenant, designed to prevent future wars.
It made future amendments incredibly difficult, leading our sources to ominously predict its final winding up. Furthermore, Germany, Austria, Russia were pointedly excluded from the original League, further undermining its claim to universal representation, its ability to build a truly inclusive world order.
So our sources conclude that the failure to produce a more satisfactory world settlement in 1919-20 was a symptom of almost universal intellectual and moral lassitude.
An overstrain of the Great War that left nations exhausted, without fresh ideas.
This pervasive lack of fresh initiative meant the treaties, instead of resolving conflict, left unsettled much distress, grievance, thereby laying the groundwork for future conflicts rather than truly ending them. So after this incredible massive sweep of history, where does it leave us? Where do we go from here?
Well, our sources suggest that human history is, in essence, a history of ideas, and the tremendous experiences of the war constitute a crowning epic, a climactic moment that forces a reckoning.
A turning point.
Potentially. The war, despite its devastation, led to the destruction of fixed ideas, prejudices, and mental limitations, spurred a universal awakening. It brought a growing realization throughout the world that there can be no securely happy individual life without a righteous general life.
Interconnectedness.
Exactly. People are more aware than ever that the entire scheme of things might be remade better, that many present evils are not necessary or inevitable.
This profound realization leads us to an important question. What then is the path forward for humanity, according to these sources?
Our sources state unequivocally that a secure world peace is only truly conceivable through an effective will for a world law under a world government.
World government, that's a big idea.
It is. They identify a more powerful force urging this on, the free and growing common intelligence of mankind. This includes the dedicated work of historians, archaeologists, ethnologists, all working towards a global community built on shared understanding and cooperation. The ultimate goal, they suggest, is to move towards a community of knowledge and will, replacing the old community of faith and obedience that characterized earlier eras.
But would a world order actually end human adventure, as some might fear? Make life boring?
Our sources strongly disagree. They argue it would but begin it.
How so?
Instead of the old romance of constant sex and combat and the hunt for gold, it would be an unending exploration upon the edge of experience, a journey into the unknown frontiers of knowledge, human potential.
So different kind of adventure.
Exactly. Humanity would move beyond the slum of petty quarrels and vanities to a splendid conquest of nature, no longer fighting it as dull conscripts of the pick and plow, but as unified, purposeful explorers.
The vision presented is truly inspiring. In the course of a few generations, our sources suggest, every country town could become an Athens, a center of culture, learning, civic engagement.
Imagine that.
And every human being could be gentle and breeding and healthy in body and mind. The whole solid earth would become man's mind and its uttermost regions his playground, reflecting an unprecedented mastery over resources, freedom of movement.
What's particularly striking here, and a crucial takeaway, is the idea that human history becomes more and more a race between education and catastrophe.
Education versus catastrophe.
Yes. The unifying efforts of Christendom, the mechanical revolution, they're powerful forces for progress. But the need for universal education is paramount to avoid unnecessary disasters, ensure humanity's continued advancement. And interestingly, the protection of animal species, the sources suggest, would be one of the first fruits of an effective world state, demonstrating a broader sense of stewardship, responsibility over the planet. Hashtag outro.
Wow. From the vastness of the cosmos to the intricate workings of the human mind and society. We've just taken a deep, deep dive into an outline of history. It really forces you to connect the dots in ways you might never have imagined.
It does. It's a story of constant change, surprising adaptations, and this ongoing struggle for order amidst chaos. Reveals that our past is far more interconnected than we often realize.
Indeed, we've traversed ages of conflict, invention, evolving thought. We've seen the cyclical patterns of rise and fall, but also those enduring, often hidden threads of progress towards greater understanding and unity.
And the core insight really remains, doesn't it? That knowledge, structure, collective will, these are the keys to overcoming the adversities of our shared past and present, and charting a more promising future.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, right here, right now? Consider this provocative thought from our sources. If, for a generation or so, machinery has had to wait its turn in the mine, it is simply because, for a time, men were cheaper than machinery.
Oh, that's an unsettling idea.
It is. What does that say about our values then, now, and what they could be in a future united world where human dignity is truly paramount?
And if knowledge truly is most valuable when understood and applied, we invite you to continue your own deep dive. Connect these threads to the challenges, the opportunities you see around you every day.
There's always more to learn, isn't there? And engaging with multiple perspectives truly enriches understanding.
Absolutely. Keep exploring.
Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through the deep dive. Until next time, keep that curiosity burning.